Welcome to another episode of Bolts and Brass. Today we're going to talk about different kinds of handguns, particularly the action type. So the action refers to how it functions, primarily the trigger and the actual firing mechanism. Now I've got three different handguns here. We have a Smith & Wesson revolver. This is somebody bobbed the hammer before I got a hold of it, but the hammer is there. It's not a hidden one. We have a very old school 1911. This is a relatively modified Springfield Armory. So these are single action. And then we have an HK USP compact that is single double action, often referred to as SA/DA. And I'm going to freeze frame here and go get a fourth one because I totally forgot striker fired. So like magic, we have a fourth handgun. This is a Sig Sauer P320 full size, and this is a striker fired gun. So we'll go over what the differences are between all these in a moment. So a single or double action revolver is called a double action because when you pull the trigger, you're doing two actions at once. So we're going to close the cylinder, which here, empty. When I pull the trigger, you're going to get to watch the hammer come back and then release. Okay, let me do that again. Hammer's coming back, fires. Now you also might have seen the cylinder turn. Let's see if you can see that. See how that turns? And it lines up the next round, cocks the hammer, and fires. So really it's a tri-action, but we refer to it as a double action because the trigger mechanism is both cocking the hammer and releasing it. Now, don't confuse that with something being a semi-automatic revolver. They're two separate things. We're only talking about how the trigger operates. Now, this is a single or double action. The reason for that is, right now, the slide is back. If we let the slide go forward, and there's no magazine, so there's nothing loaded, the hammer is back. There we go. You can see the hammer. It has a decocker, so I can decock the hammer. The hammer is now tucked in. If I pull the trigger, and let's put that somewhere you can see that. Let's see. This is going to be very awkward pulling this with my thumb, but see the hammer come back and release. Hammer comes back and release. So that's double action. But after the first shot, so I pull the trigger, gun went off, right? Slide comes back, slide goes forward. We've loaded the next round. Semi-automatic, we'll cover that in a different video. But notice, the hammer is still back. Now, when I release the trigger to reset it and pull it again, it fires. So the second shot is single action. Now you could hit the decocker and bring the hammer down and do a double action if you wanted. But that's what single double means, or double single. It means you've got the option of firing a double action shot, or you could fire it single action. And normally after the first round, you're firing single action. This was a very common design. Early semi-automatic pistols. Not early, mid. So late 70s to late 90s, really, it became less common. It was very common for safety. This first trigger pull is awful long. It just really takes a lot of movement, and it's much stiffer. Same thing with a double action revolver. This trigger pull is pretty long and stiff. Now I'm gonna make the hammer stay back. Okay, so it's tough because somebody bobbed it, which means they cut off the part your thumb actually uses. So now, if I've got that trigger, and I'm gonna use my thumb for this since it's easier for you to see. Trigger's almost all the way back. You see that? There we go. The trigger is almost all the way back. That's the point where it actually releases. Very little pressure to release that. That's a single action trigger pull. I've already cocked the hammer manually, so the trigger is only releasing it, single action. That can give you a very crisp, very clean, short trigger pull. You have the same thing here. It's not as obvious on the trigger, but short, cleaner trigger pull, much less effort, encourages better accuracy. However, then you have something like this. This is a single action only. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the hammer down. We'll pull the trigger first. Yeah, really is clear. Okay? Very short. However, unlike these two, at this point, the hammer's down. This trigger does nothing. I can yank on that all I want. It cannot pull this hammer back. You have to manually cock the hammer or work the slide. And then you can pull the trigger again. Now the design assumes that you've racked the slide, loaded it, holding it, pull the trigger. And then the slide comes back, goes forward, has loaded the next round, and you pull the trigger again. This is very easy to shoot quickly and accurately. It is, competition-wise, a very popular design. It was very popular in the early 1900s because it is simpler to build and encourages better accuracy. Now, the downside is, it's very awkward to do that at that angle. Safety's on, can't pull the trigger. Safety off, hand not holding on the grip safety, can't pull the trigger. So in that sense, it's very safe. But if I'm holding it and my finger goes in that trigger guard and the safety's off, you know, for example, I'm a police officer and I'm holding a suspect at gunpoint. He yells boo and my hand clenches. Now that is a very short, light trigger pull. Potentially more dangerous in that sense, in terms of accidentally pulling the trigger when you shouldn't have had your finger on the trigger, but you did. Oops. And that obviously is not what you want. Now, with proper training and proper use, perfectly safe. In terms of actual safeties built in, more than adequate. In terms of oops safety, where you had your finger on the trigger with all the safeties disengaged and you squeezed your hand because you got startled or tripped or something, these are far less likely to be a problem. You notice that you've got a trigger there long before you go all the way back and pull the trigger. Now those are the three traditional setups. Then you've got the new style. And I say new in the sense that striker fired pistols have only been a thing since the 80s. I could have the exact years wrong, but what they do is when the slide comes back, it partially cocks what in the traditional gun it would be the firing pin, but it's also spring loaded and has a catch. So it is partially cocked, not far enough to fire the round normally, but you've taken some of the work and done that. And then, And then you pull the trigger a little bit. Now, that's a pretty short trigger pull, right? Most striker fire guns have a slightly longer trigger pull. This is a more of a match grade trigger, but it's doing most of the work for you, okay? But it's still not single action. It's not cocking the hammer and then releasing it. Or sorry, it's not double action. It's not cocking the hammer and then releasing it, but it's not single action either, because it is putting that final tension on the spring and then releasing. So they call it striker fire. It is essentially a hybrid design. It is not quite a single action. It's not quite a double action. There's no actual hammer involved. And a lot of modern pistols are like this. It is a very easy design to build safely. It is a very easy design to create acceptable triggers. Police, self-defense, general range use. It is not usually a trigger that is the top in terms of feel. That really is the realm of dedicated single action setups. But that is it. That is the difference between single and double action. And generally speaking, when you're talking single and double action or striker fire, you are talking handguns. Rifles use a different setup. They have a number of different options, but for the most part, you can really think of rifles as being single action. It is exceptionally uncommon to see anything other than a single action rifle, to the point where they're not referred to that way at all. They tend to refer to it based on how the action works of the actual rifle in terms of loading and unloading the round. That is far more important in the rifle than how the trigger is releasing the firing pin. So that is it. Take care, have fun, stay safe, y'all.